Hi students. So let's do a Coase theorem example. And you know the Coase theorem. It says that if transaction costs are minimal and property rights well established, an agreement can be negotiated absent government involvement. The actual Coase theorem doesn't say minimal, it says 0. But minimal is difficult, 0 is impossible. And one of the earliest Coase theorem examples used farmers and ranchers. And the idea here of what's going on is that the rancher's cattle is trampling the farmer's crops. So what the marginal cost line here shows is the amount of costs for each acre trampled. The cost to the farmers for the 60th acre trampled is $90. For the 30th acre trampled is $45. For the 100th acre trampled is $150. You could do an 80 here. For the 80th acre trampled, the cost is, say, $100, say $110. So if we want to know the total cost to the farmers, we would have to add up the cost for each acre trampled. And graphically, that's actually the area under the curve. If we want to do the same for the benefits for ranchers, you can see that the benefit to a rancher of trampling 30 acres is $40. The 30th acre is $40. The 60th acre is $90. The 80th acre looks like it has a benefit of like $45. So the benefit is different for the ranchers for every acre, just like the cost is different for each acre for the farmers. So if we want to come up with the total benefit to the ranchers, then we have to look at the area, the whole area underneath the marginal benefit curve. So that's how that would look graphically. So at issue here then is how can the farmers and the ranchers solve this situation together? Again, the Coase theorem, absent government involvement. And to do this, we would need to establish who has the rights. And if the farmer has the rights to have non-trampled crops, then the rancher would need to, if they wanted to do some crop trampling, would need to offer to compensate the farmers. There's an area, end of slideshow, we don't want that. There's an area on this graph where negotiation is very, very possible, and it's the area that's bounded here by the equilibrium point. Because if the farmers have rights, they could absolutely demand 0 acres being trampled. But if we look again at this 30-acre point, and we see that the cost to the farmers for that 30th acre being trampled is only $45, but the cost to the rancher, or the benefit to the rancher for being allowed to trample it, is $140, then you could see that the rancher might be willing to pay some money to the farmer to allow them to trample it, and they could come out to a deal really anywhere for this 30th acre between $45 and $140 would make both of them better off. And that negotiation is going to be possible all the way up to the 60-acre mark, because after the 60-acre mark, the benefit to the ranchers is less than the cost to the farmers, so there's no way they're going to make an agreement. So the question then, if the farmers have rights and there's no possible negotiation, they're basically just going to say 0. You can't trample anything. But if there is negotiation, they're going to negotiate to 60 acres, again because it's worth it to the ranchers to pay, and it's worth it for the farmers to receive in any of the amount of acres when the benefits to the ranchers are greater than the cost to the farmers, because the ranchers are going to pay them off. So the question is, to be paid off for 60 acres of being trampled, what's the least the farmers will take? And the least they'll take is anything that will cover their costs, maybe a little bit more. And here's their costs. It's area C. Remember that we represented their total costs of 100 acres by the whole area under the curve? That would have been C, D, E, and F. But since we're only talking about 60 acres, their costs are everything under their cost curve, bounded by the 60. So they're going to need at least C. What about the ranchers? What's the most the ranchers will offer? Well, what's the benefit to the rancher? I'm going to switch colors here. What's the benefit to the rancher of being able to have their cattle roam freely? The benefit is probably the fences they don't have to build, right? The savings. And for them, it's going to be everything underneath the marginal benefit curve. Remember again, I do not want to do that. I do not. Let's close that. Well, I'm going to keep. So if I kept them and I go back in, I think we're good. So remember that they get the benefit for the 30th acre and the 60th acre and all the other acres. So here we're talking all the area, again, under the benefit curve, but only up to 60, because they're only going to trample 60 acres. So that's the areas A and B and C. In this tutorial, I'm not going to do the numerical. You can see it asks to answer both numerically, but the numeric can be figured out by you guys using your algebra. Triangles being 1/2 base times height, and rectangles being base times height. So the farmers will take at least C. The ranchers are willing to give A, B, and C. So somewhere in between there, they're going to negotiate a price. And the price they negotiated by this graph is 90. So again, that's if the farmers have rights. But what if the ranchers have the rights? Farmers have no right at all not to have their crops trampled. Farmers can trample as much as benefits them. And we can see by this graph that that's going to be 80 or 100 acres. So they're going to benefit 100 acres. Let's forget about all of this stuff here now. That one's not going to erase because that's before I had to tell it to keep my ink annotations. But let's change to green and see what we're talking about. So the first thing is, how far down will they negotiate? How much reduction in trampling can they negotiate? Because now the farmers are paying the ranchers not to trample. And so there's room for negotiation certainly to 80 acres. And how do we know that? Because the cost of the farmers at 80 acres is $120. And the cost to the benefit to the ranchers is only 45. So we've got room here for the farmers to offer the ranchers some money. And that's going to be true all the way down to 60. Because below 60, like for instance at 30, below 60, the cost to the farmers are less than the benefit to the ranchers. So they're not going to be, the ranchers are going to need at least 140, and the cost to the farmers are only 45 of letting it be trampled. So that's not going to work. But basically, we've got room for negotiation anywhere all the way down to 60 acres. And so we're going to say that we're negotiating all the way down to 60 acres. So our question then is, what's the least the ranchers will take? The least that the ranchers will take is they have to cover their benefits, right? So if they're allowed to trample crops. Their benefits are area D, so the least they're going to take is this amount of money. This is going to be the area of D. And what's the most the farmers will offer? Well, the most the farmers will offer is anything under the cost curve, because this is the cost to them. This is the cost to them for having these acres trampled. So D, E, and F. So the farmers will offer D, E, F, at most D, E, F. The ranchers will take at least D, and so they'll negotiate somewhere in the middle. And again, they're negotiating at $90. So don't get confused by thinking $90 is any kind of total amount. They've negotiated $90 an acre, actually, in both of these situations. But whenever we're asked for total amounts, like what's the least the farmers will take, what's the most ranchers will offer, we're talking about areas under the curve. And with the farmers, we're talking about the area underneath the cost curve. With the ranchers, we're talking about the area underneath the benefit curve. So hopefully this will help. Feel free to get a hold of me if you have any questions. And have a good rest of your day.